Hey everybody, Jason Sheftel here, and it is time for a quick update on something important going on in Ukraine. So, the war in Ukraine is pulling everybody in. Countries are taking a stand, corporations are taking a stand, and now individuals are taking a stand. I mean, everybody can already see people on social media saying, "Stand with Ukraine, I stand with Ukraine." There's a lot of blue and yellow everywhere. But the real individuals taking a stand are the foreigners that are flooding into Ukraine to basically fight for the Ukrainian government and Ukrainian people against Russia. This is a really big deal. There are major flows of foreign fighters going into the country as over 1 million refugees are heading out. So we're seeing musterings, basically, the old kind of word for when you basically grab a group of people and bring them into the military, and when the country really has a need for it. And this is from the top down. So the Ukrainian president has asked people to come to the country to fight. Visa restrictions are gone. There are American and British special forces veterans sort of around the country, kind of preparing to head in. There are both people that are very competent that are trying to fight this war and get in there. And I'm sure there's a lot of CIA and other foreign intelligence and special forces groups involved. But then there's just the people themselves. And this is a real international legion that is forming and gathering in the country to help fight this war. And this is very, very important and something we have to talk about because the West hasn't really seen something like this at this scale for a while. So this is incredibly common in history. This is what's happened. It happened in various Crimean wars. It happens all the time. It's really common. And ironically enough, it's also been very common recently, but for the sort of people and groups and countries that we don't really want to think about. And the great comparison are all the jihadi groups of the 1990s, 2000s, and 2010s, where the United States has been at war with these groups for decades now. And this is what happened, right? You had a really animating ideology that people flooded towards and they just cleaved towards from all sorts of countries and from all around the world. There's all these stories of men from the United States or women, men and women, everybody from Western countries that go and they end up fighting for Al Qaeda or ISIS or whatever group it is. And it's been a very compelling, mystifying, darkly fascinating type story for a lot of Westerners because it's so different and crazy and odd. But the really interesting inversion that we're seeing is that now we're seeing the same thing happen, but everybody in the West thinks this is something different and new because the ideology, what we're trying to defend, basically the whole world system, the integrity of Europe, the international system of norms and rules since 1945, all of this is what we feel like we're defending on some level. And now people are willing to fight for it. It's the only really difference between this is just the animating idea that people are fighting for. So that's really important. And I'm not trying to knock what people are doing, but it's really good to get a bit of history on what exactly all of this is because it's a very weird thing. In an odd way, people are fighting for another country when often we're very ambivalent or confused or despondent or desperate about our own country. There's something very interesting and real about how people will go fight for another country, even though their own sense of nationalism is very limited, distorted, attenuated in their own country. It's a very, very interesting thing. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. But first, let's do the history. These nationalist fervors were really big in the 19th and 20th centuries. There was a period when nationalism was really roiling the world, and all sorts of groups were fighting for basically a national movement as for a national for a nation state. And people all around the world got involved and got invested. So that could be Spain in the 1930s, where all sorts of Americans really went and fought in the Spanish Civil War there, or any number of anti-colonial movements people saw in the second half of the 20th century. And the real motivation behind this is this fervor for emancipation, for national emancipation. It's really something that just gets people going. And there are a lot of people who are very listless, kind of bored, empty, going through the motions during their daily life, but they hear about this and they become animated really as never before, as they probably haven't been since their adolescence. And it's a really, really important phenomenon. It's deeply connected to the nature of nationalism as a social technology that is binding a people to a land, and the fact that people actually want to be bound to both their group and to a specific place. The same way you want a home and you want a family, you want something on the broader macro social level. And there's a deep, deep need for that in human beings. It's clear when you see just how invested people get. And there are weird things, right? There's something odd in the sense of this war because it's both a fight for Ukraine, but it's also a fight for the international system more broadly. And that's a very common thing. You have this dual idealism. There's both the national level and the international level. And it often gets very muddled and confused. But there are people, again, look at social media, you'll see people saying, fight for Ukraine. We can't let Russia destroy this. We can't do this. And all of these deep, powerful emotions are there and they're active. And they're not usually very ordered. There's a lot of people who are really, really fond of Ukraine. And a couple weeks ago, they didn't know where it was on a map. And it's not to knock these people. There's no reason to do that. But it's just, again, we've forgotten so much about how the globe is structured, where all the different places are, where the people are, and the deep histories and connections that people have. Because anybody, when they're looking at their own history, they're looking at their ethnicity, their racial identity, the language they speak, and basically the path that their families, both sides of their family, took to get to them. And that leads through various groups and various peoples and various places. And you can't ignore these places. And we've tried to ignore these places for a long time, but it really doesn't work. And we're going to see in this decade, all of that is going to disappear. And we're going to see something very new. And it's going to look a lot more like what we've seen throughout human history. It's not going to be nearly as pleasant, but it's going to be more familiar if we're willing to acknowledge the kind of basics about who humans are and what they do and how they operate. And the really important thing to think about here is that these aren't mercenaries, right? Mercenaries go to a place to fight for money. So during the American Civil War, there were a lot of Prussian German mercenaries that fought on the American side. They weren't there to fight for independence of the American colonies back then. That was not what they were interested in. They were interested in a couple dollars, or not dollars, whatever it happened to be. That was what they wanted. They wanted money. But today, and what we're seeing in Ukraine, what we're seeing also with jihadi groups, and what we've seen all around the world as people are fighting for idealistic group identities that they really want to see survive or thrive in the world, they're fighting for something they believe in. They're militant idealists that are fighting for something they believe in, which just happens to be another country. And the very difficult thing about this, I mean, I call them a militant idealist, not to say it's a bad thing, but it's quite literally a person who has become willing to become militant to fight for an ideal. And it's very different if you're Ukrainian. That's very different. You're a Ukrainian. For example, right now it's illegal basically if you're a Ukrainian male to leave Ukraine, except under very, very unusual circumstances, being with the military. You're fighting for your country. The whole country is getting in this together and everybody has to fight for it. That is the way it works. But when you're fighting for another country and you're willing to move from working as a clerk at a Kroger's to go fight for Ukraine, that's something very different. And you are choosing to become militant for an ideal. For what else would it be, right? What else could you be fighting for? You're not fighting for money. You're not really fighting for glory or fame. I guess everyone can always be fighting for glory or fame, on some mitigated, unconscious sort of level. But really, that's not the best way to do it, right? You might as well just go try and become an influencer, an Instagram star, or something. That's probably a better way to go for fame. But there is something they're fighting for, and that is an ideal, and that is what we're really talking about right now. The powerful, confusing thing that we need to keep focusing on is, again, that this isn't for their own country, right? These are people fighting for a place other than where they live and other than the group that they're a part of. That is telling us something very important about people, about people in general. I mean, that's really just the best way to think about it. It is remarkable how much people have fought for other places because they're fighting for ideas. And it could be anywhere. It could be Cuba, it could be China or Spain or Ireland or Ukraine or India. All these places back in the day, people fought for and they felt for in a way, going about their daily life they often don't feel about their own country. That is something really, really important. We pretend like global unity rules the world, but we have to acknowledge and just see what we're seeing on social media, that it is people everywhere becoming emotionally compelled by these national struggles. That is something that, particularly on the left and the center left in this country, there's been a strong push against nationalism because the nationalism of Europe was the more right nationalism that seemed to be a threat to the global system in the same way. And now that same nationalism in Eastern Europe is part of what is defending the system. So this is one of those areas where you're going to see people go back and forth because, particularly on the left, the animus for a lot of this isn't as much about Ukraine, although it is in a sort of caring, emotional sense for all the people who are struggling and suffering under a sort of oppressive uh, invasion. That is not as much for the more sort of heavily intellectually invested group. They're really caring about the broader international system. So on the left, it's more fighting for the international system. On the right, it is often more fighting for the specific, blood and soil type thing. But it doesn't really matter. And Americans really need to think about this. Think about how your emotions are being powerfully, powerfully drawn to a country that you know nothing about. Just straight up, know absolutely nothing about. Didn't know where the Dnieper River was. Didn't know what Odessa's role was. Didn't know Kharkiv. Didn't know Kiev. Didn't know any of this stuff. Didn't have a great sense of the history of the Crimean Peninsula, its connection to Russia, the fact that there was the major warm water port in the Soviet Union and former Russia was in Crimea. All of these connections, the industrial centers in the east compared to the more commercial centers in the west, and then you go closer to Moldova and the whole situation over there. All of this eludes us, and it isn't really something everybody should concern themselves with. It is a lot of stuff to think about and to know, and it's a real struggle in the modern world to find a reason to learn all these things about the rest of the world. We often only get animated or care when there's something to fight for, but we can't forget that we don't quite understand what it is we're fighting for. Yeah, you're fighting for the global system. That's fine. But we got to talk about what that actually means and what that leads to. So I'm not really here to talk about and comment on everyone's motivations in the same way. I'm really only just hinting that there's something more there because it's not something I really want to dive into right now. It's very important and it kind of relates to our ignorance and our hopes and our dreams and our weird somnambulant wanderings through life at times. But the more important thing is the outcomes, right? What is going to be the result of Ukraine's struggle for survival and for those foreigners who go help fight it? Will it lead to a great independent nation, and will it save this international system that people are so concerned about? That is the key question. And I brought up these other foreign fighters and major national quests for liberation, all that stuff from the past to help us answer this question. What was the outcome of those great national struggles in the past? Because that helps us see where this might be going. So did all of those wars of the 19th and particularly the 20th century lead to great, vibrant, independent nations and a world filled with them? Well, the truth is that it did not, right? This is what the meat of all that I'm trying to get to is really about. The nations that were born in the 20th century, in particular, were born because the U.S. wanted it and that the foreign powers that wanted to stop it really couldn't. They were boxed out. And that is a lot of what is going on. The United States helped encourage a world of independent nations because that gave it a greater freedom to maneuver, and it broke apart the many imperial systems that were clogging up a world of commerce and a world of opportunity for Americans and for the broader strategic picture around the United States. That's a major reason why this happened. Then after World War II, a broader picture of global prosperity and unity was layered on top of that to help fight against, again, the strategic threat of the Soviet Union. But that is the overall reason why this happened. So it wasn't primarily because noble populations and sympathetic foreigners fought in these wars that things like this happened. It is so important to think about this. So the Spanish Civil War in the 30s led to decades of dictatorship, and a similar revolution in Cuba did. All sorts of revolutions in Latin America have not led anywhere, and you end up just with this constant churn of revolution. It's revolution after revolution. And it is very important to just realize that just because a nation can fight for itself and manages to overcome whatever border system was currently in place doesn't mean it can build something better or self-sustaining or something that it won't just end up revolting against again in a few years or a few decades. This is the harsh truth around the world. And the absolute important thing to realize is that the many nations around the world right now, including Ukraine and including China, are going to break down. They are not about to be strong, independent nations. They're not really long for this world. And there's a deep reason why. And it's because that system that the United States built required a lot of things. It had to make a lot of nations and a lot of places secure and resource rich in ways that they're not naturally. So for a place like Ukraine, you have to make a place that is so close and threatening to Russia somehow stable in its security environment and with its economic connections to the rest of the world. Because basically, the more Ukraine connects with other places economically, the more that is a threat to Russia, the more it just tries to be part of a security world that pleases Russia. It basically limits its economic potential writ large. It is a bind, and it's a bind that has bound this part of the world, as well as the regions above it, for a very, very long time. This is something that's gone on for basically hundreds of years at this point. The wars in Eastern Europe have gone on for so long, it is really kind of mind boggling. And we really just have to remember this because a lot of these battles have gone on for so long. They've gone on for not just decades, these national quests, these quests for liberation and for a sturdy, resilient nation state. They have gone on for not just decades, but, and not even just centuries, but probably thousands of years in some sense, in some places. Vietnam is a great example. There are places where there has just been a never-ending struggle to create that nation state that the people want, to bind themselves permanently and stably to a place that they feel a connection to. That is what we are really faced with right now. And unfortunately, this breakdown of the world, there's nothing that any individual population, whether Ukrainian or Chinese, can do about it, nor any foreigners. Doesn't matter how many foreigners flood into Poland or Ukraine or these other places. What will basically happen is that even if you manage to stabilize one of these places, you will destabilize another one. So you focus on keeping Ukraine together and independent and stable, you're going to cause real problems in a place like Russia. It's a balancing act. You can't always win. You can't have everything. You can't have every nation stable and independent and secure and peaceful and prosperous. It just isn't the way it works. There's a reason that all these places have warred for so long. Sometimes I get almost exasperated because people are pretending like these things that are happening are completely out of this world. They're out of this world because we've forgotten what the world looks like, and we've been lulled into thinking that the fantasy world the United States built could last forever, and it cannot. So I'm bringing all this up, not to go rage against the fact that people aren't prepared for what's coming, although that's kind of important. It's more, if we're going to see this massive investment of people's energy and idealism into something like the defense of Ukraine, we have to realize where this is heading, because this energy and this idealism is a finite resource, right? We can't invest in everything. We can't throw out our sympathetic energy and love and appreciation and thought and everything we kind of have as a person into every single problem that comes up. We have to choose, and we have to choose well, because we don't have unlimited time. We don't have unlimited energy. We don't have unlimited money. We don't have unlimited youth. We don't have unlimited physical strength, right? Especially if you're talking about a war, you don't want to end up fighting for the liberation of a country in your, say, 20s or 30s that ends up kind of broken in pieces. And then you're in your 40s and 50s and maybe you should have fought for this other place, right? This is kind of what we're talking about now. The reason why we're all investing in a thing like Ukraine, in a place like Ukraine, which isn't what Americans are really interested in overall, in general. The United States military isn't there, yet American citizens and other European citizens are preparing to fight. We are striving, all of us, everywhere in the modern world, to find things to believe in and fight for. The truth is, our isolated consumer economy with small, kind of broken relationships, crushed family structures, all of this stuff doesn't give us the things as individuals and as people that we need and we crave psychologically, socially, emotionally. And that is where we get these very powerful surges of energy towards all sorts of idealistic causes. And wars of self-defense and liberation are extremely compelling to selling random internet products online that you know deep down are going to be worthless basically within a couple weeks, or something that will just be forgotten in a closet, anything like that. Or you're selling, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you're really doing. If you feel like it's not deeply connected to who you are as a person, who the groups you feel like you're a part of are as groups, all of that, it feels like nothing. And it feels like nothing in particular when real events are going on around the world. So a lot of people who are very comfortable and happy and really complacent in their normal life, when once COVID hit, things changed and the world seemed larger and both more frightening but also alive again. And the same thing is happening now in Ukraine. There is a real war. It is no longer about trying to develop a new chat app and having that go big and becoming a billionaire. That is pretty irrelevant. That is not the depth of ambition or the content of your ambition. It's not the best thing that you could have done, right? There are real events. History is in motion, and people are activated by these sorts of periods. And it makes a lot of sense that people will run to a place like Ukraine. It doesn't matter if it was Ukraine, it could have been Latvia, and it would have had the same effect because there's that surge of energy, and you feel like, well, I might as well do something that makes me feel like that rather than doing something that makes me feel vacant and dead. So that is the context for this, right? And I'm bringing this up because you don't have this energy. Now that you feel that energy, you feel this energy for Ukraine, which you didn't know existed a little while ago. The real thing to do is to find a place to put that energy that feels valuable and that takes into account this broader context. For a long time, we've pretended the world would just go on as it is, but it's not going to go on as it is. But we can know where things are headed, and we can try and figure out what each of us can do individually to better function and participate in the world that's coming. It's not going to be the answer to just try and save and protect this world that we've known. I know that feels very, very valuable right now, but it isn't going to work for a variety of reasons. I'm going to get into in a bunch of other videos. But the point is, you still want to do something with that same sense of idealism and power and purpose, something that you could feel like you would be putting 10 hours a day into and feel great. You wouldn't feel exhausted and deflated and like you're giving away your soul to something you don't care about. That is the deeper, deeper challenge that we should all be thinking about. We want to find something that is worth putting this energy and this idealism into. And I'll just say it again. These wars have gone on in Eastern Europe, in East Asia, parts of the Middle East, and Africa, and well, not as long in South America, but also for a very long time in South America. They've been going on for hundreds, if not thousands of years. This is not the thing to put your energy into. It isn't. It isn't. And what I'm going to try and do, and what I'm trying to do in a lot of these videos, a lot of the other stuff I do, is to give people a context for how the world actually works, why it ended up the way it did, and we all got lulled into the sleep we're into, and then also where things are headed, and if there's a way we can figure out to direct these energies to something valuable that will mean something in this kind of world that's coming. So that is the overall goal here. And so I brought up the foreign fighters. I brought up this energy, this enthusiasm, because it's all being misdirected in a lot of ways to protecting a world that we can't protect. Unfortunately, COVID and the 2008 financial crisis and the endless Middle Eastern wars and now this new conflict in Europe are all showing us how little we can affect this macro social world that we live in. And this is unfortunate. It makes us feel useless and small and also defenseless and vulnerable and just buffeted around by the forces of the world. And that is a miserable feeling. But we can get around that by having greater knowledge and greater understanding of the way things are and where they're headed. So that's really important because, for example, people right now who are very emotionally invested in green energy and combating climate change, unfortunately for them, they're about to be brutally punished by what's coming because the world has changed and the nature of the energy systems of the world are not going to be amenable to the current formulation of how to accomplish those goals related to green energy and to combating climate change. So that is basically what's going to happen is that people's ideals are going to rot. That is it's kind of, you think about Nietzsche, who said that all of the values are destroyed after the death of God, all that kind of stuff. What we do is we kind of just invent values. We invent them. You're a high school kid and you think you just want to be a giant bodybuilder, and you realize, oh God, I can only really get my musculature to this level, and suddenly that ideal dies, and then you have to create a new one. And we actually experience in our life is the the basically the how would you say the formation and the destruction of all of our ideals. It's not even that. I mean, simpler. It's like they basically grow and then they rot. So we grow a new ideal and then we watch it rot, and it's a miserable experience. Oh, I thought I was going to be this sort of person, and then that doesn't work, or you only get a little small fragment of it. Okay, that's done. Now I'm a new sort of person, or I want to be this new person, and you just have to keep doing this. But in particular, it is these broad macro social visions of the world, of a green, harmonious planet, of a beautiful, prosperous, peaceful world. All of these broader ideals are actually the containers for a lot of our other more personal, more micro social ambitions and desires. So these things are very, very debilitating if they start to break down. So we really do need to get better ideals and better context for this process of creating a sense of what the world is and trying to move through it, and then adjusting that as you go along. We really need something better, because the truth is, this is really just our fate. We have to do this. It's the nature of being a human in the modern world. There's no other way. There's no avoiding this. Even if you go into the woods somewhere, try and live off of everything, you can't do it. There's giant wars. There's agricultural problems. There's energy. There's problems in all sorts of major productive systems that make your life possible, whether you're in the woods alone with your wife or by yourself or not. Doesn't matter. So the best we can do is be informed, follow what we want to do, follow what we think who we are, really, follow who you think you are, and not become defeated and nihilistic. That's the reason I made this video. I'm telling you people, if you invest all your energy into going into Ukraine, saving things there, you are going to be really, really disappointed. It is going to break down. And as these broader, just giant ideals break, it's very easy to become defeated and nihilistic, because we don't want to get back on the horse and try something new and create a broader vision. Usually we weren't supposed to create visions. Back in the day, you had some shaman or some religious figure or just a small, close-knit, tight cultural group that gave you your sense of the world. But we don't have that anymore. You have to create your own. And unfortunately, a world where things are tumultuous and breaking down is one where not only is our microsocial world of all of our interpersonal relationships very destabilized in a lot of ways, but now the macro social world is going to be a lot like that too. So check out more videos like this. Check out other content I have, course that's coming up, book that's coming out, podcasts, interviews, stuff like that. I'm trying to give more information for people. You can also contact me personally. I do stuff like this for individuals and businesses as we try and navigate the stuff that's coming. It's very important. So I'll kind of leave it at that. And just remember, don't give up, but also don't give up on investing in the things that, I'll say it again. Just don't give up, but also don't invest in things that will only tear you down in a few months. That's the way to think about it. So it ain't worth it. And with that, this is Jason Sheftel. Again, thanks for watching the video. Please share, please subscribe, please throw on notifications. There's no better time to have notifications than when the world is transforming as we know it.